Digital Dissection, a nerd podcast, can at times contain adult language and themes. It is not intended for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the Digital Dissection podcast, where we take a closer and possibly unnecessary look at our favorite properties, creators, and topics. We are your humble hosts, Joe and Mark, two pop culture nerds dedicated to telling entertainment history before it's forgotten too soon. Join us on Facebook, Twitter, and our blog for more information on the show. We also love to hear from you, so why not write us at digitaldissectionpodcast@gmail.com. And now that we've got that out of the way, let's get to dissecting.
Hello, fellow nerds, and welcome back to Digital Dissection, where we take a closer and possibly unnecessary look at our favorite properties and creators. Today, we're joined by an absolute legend of TV and film, having over 180 credits to his name. This includes Conan the Adventurer, Seinfeld, Employee of the Month, and Mirror Mirror, just to name a few. He's advocating for change within the entertainment industry, making the world a better place for individuals with disabilities. We're honored to welcome Danny Woodburn. Welcome to the show, Danny. How are we doing today?
I'm great. I'm great, Mark. And Doug, and Nate, and Joe. It's a pleasure to be here.
We're excited to have you. And I'd like to add to the accolade, one of my favorite creators of all time, and I think it was your first actual feature film, was Jingle All the Way.
Yes, that was my first, well, not my first feature, but my first, big budget studio. I had made some smaller appearances, and what was my first film? Oh, The Magic of the Golden Bear Part 3. Okay, so I missed the first two with believe it or not, Cheech Marin and Mr. T.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Yeah, that was my first feature. But yeah, Jingle was my first big budget, and Brian Levant, the director of that, actually brought me in to work on Flintstones 2, Viva Rock Vegas. So, and I still talk to Brian from time to time. And of course, Jingle just had their 25th anniversary this past Christmas. So that was pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, God, 25 years ago already. Yikes.
To this day, it's still one of my favorite quotes is, who said you could eat my cookies? Love it. Every year.
Look at you bringing out the Arnold impression. Look at you.
Hey, I heard you have a wonderful one as well, because I saw one of your speeches where you've actually used it before. So I'm sure that his accent's rubbed off on you a little bit.
Come on, you idiot! Don't be an idiot. Come on. Here's the trick. Anybody can do it. Here's the trick to doing Schwarzenegger impression. You have to begin your sentence as if you're going to vomit. So it's come on, like it's coming up. Here comes the schnitzel. So and I got it from, obviously being on the set. That's where I picked up the impression, because he had a guy, his on-set dresser he had a name, but Arnold called him Dunce. And don't know why he called him Dunce, but he would go Dunce, and Dunce would go yo, and then he would call him over for whatever. So it was my first day on the set, and it's a scene where they're driving across the bridge. We're driving across the bridge, and Jim Belushi is singing this song he makes up, this goofy Christmas song in the car. It's a wide shot, but there's a little closer shot of Arnold driving by in the Jeep, and so he's about to start. They're about to roll, and he yells Dunce, and Dunce comes running over, and he goes candy, and Dunce reaches in like a pouch, pulls out a hard candy, and pops it in Arnold's mouth, and then runs out of the shop. And I was like, this is how this is.
This just got weird. Everything else, before that, it seemed normal, but now,
right. Now I know the key to becoming a billionaire. You have to be able to talk to people like that. No, but he was a trip. He was a lot of fun. And, whenever you work on a show, there's always the captain of the set, and, directors and producers a lot of times can take a little bit of a backseat to some of these performers because they're just so charismatic and fun, and you can see why Arnold has had such a long career, you know. So his whole thing was that after a take, he would go, "Very nice," like that, you know. Like we'd finish a take, and he would be happy with it. And he'd go, "Very nice." So at the end of the run, he gave everybody hats that said "Very nice," you know.
Wow.
That was his thing, you know. That was his thing. Yeah. So that, I mean, Jingle, you know, proved to be like, it's great to be in a Christmas movie because it just runs forever and ever and ever. And I've done, I don't know, 4 or 5 of them, 5 at least by now.
Yeah, and seriously, that movie is timeless. It also has the late Phil Hartman. It's absolutely a timeless classic. It's part of my holiday must-watch lineup.
And Phil is just so great. You know, originally it was supposed to be, I think, Phil as the lead, as the Arnold lead.
Wow.
Yeah, and so and this is a story I only recently heard, and so, you know, when they brought Arnold in, it's like that just cinched the whole film. Like, oh yeah, we're gonna do this because Arnold really pitched for that, and I think maybe Arnold was gonna play the Sinbad role. I forget how it was. Anyway, it was definitely a totally different setup. But Phil plays that sort of weaselly guy with such perfection, you know, down to the little smiles he gives, and you feel like he's looking right at camera, but he's not. It was just such a great. He was such a great performer. I really admired his work because he could take even the smallest thing and just blow it up. You know, there's a lot of actors like that. You think about like Gene Wilder, who I actually worked on his show behind the scenes back in '94, I guess it was. He had a show called Something Wilder, and he was a dad, you know, an older dad with a younger wife, and the show didn't last more than maybe a season and a half or something like that. But being on that set with Gene and watching him work, where he could take just the smallest thing and blow it up to the biggest thing, you know, it's just all about raising the stakes. He was such a master at that, and that's why, like, if you watch Gene in one of his earliest roles in Bonnie and Clyde, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Bonnie and Clyde with Warren Beatty, and Faye Dunaway, but Gene is the husband, and these newlyweds who get, you know, hijacked by Bonnie and Clyde, and they're driving along in their car, and he plays this nervous energy really well, but he just really draws all the attention to him without doing it intentionally. You know, he's just really just a master of presence on screen. So I love a lot watching him. Just watching him every day on the set turn one line into like a whole soliloquy in a sense, you know, and you see that in all of his work.
I imagine that has got to be kind of surreal to, you know, sit there and observe. You know, we've heard that from other actors too, who get caught up in the moment and you forget where your spot is, you know, on that scene.
Right. Yeah. It's funny because it's the, I was such an admirer of Gene as a boy, and I saw every one of his movies, you know, even the obscure ones like Sherlock Holmes' Smarter Brother. I don't know if you ever saw that.
Yeah.
All these sort of unusual films that he made, some with Marty Feldman as well, besides Young Frankenstein. But to be able to work with people that you grew up admiring and idolizing and feeling like these are role models for your career, and then getting a chance to work with them, it's always like those moments where you're pinching yourself. Is this a dream? You know, that was definitely true of working with Danny DeVito and Robin Williams on Death to Smoochie. That was just like, you know, to have a scene with him is definitely a dream come true. It's one of my favorite films to have worked on in my entire career, was just that. And you know, I grew up watching Taxi and watching all these Danny DeVito movies before I even made it in LA. And so I was a big admirer of him, and he was a dark comic in that sense. As Robin called him, he's a troll without a bridge. It's a perfect description.
Well,
so like
Oh, go ahead,
I
Joe.
was just saying that you mentioned like getting inspiration from Taxi and other shows that you watched growing up. Is that kind of like what got you into wanting to be an actor in the first place?
Yeah, I think one was my desire to make people laugh. Two, it was fun. One, it was fun, and two, it was a really great way to keep from being beat up as a kid. Looking different, being a small guy. You have to figure out ways to fit in, and so comedy for me was my way in. And I grew up with this. I had a single mom raising three boys, and back in the '70s, you did a lot of babysitting yourself, and sometimes the babysitter television. And so, I watched and absorbed everything back then. And the first episode of Seinfeld, where and there's a bigger story around this, but the moment that George Costanza uses the M word with Mickey, and that beat where Mickey and Doug, you've probably turned this into a meme already, where he grabs the countertop, where he goes, and he grabs the countertop like that.
Yeah.
So it's that is quintessential Danny DeVito, right? That little beat,
wow, really?
That beat is like right out of that, that that whole like angry Danny DeVito moment,
I actually had this is actually coming to one of the questions that I had actually prepared for this. That scene always really stood out to me while watching Seinfeld, and you mentioned big television and movie personalities and how they kind of break out of the screen, people like Danny DeVito, etc. And when I would see you on Seinfeld, you didn't seem like one of the tertiary characters that come and go. You came onto the show with such a strong presence that you were almost like a Newman, a close friend of Kramer, a staple of the show.
Right.
But another thing about that part that resonated with me, and you mentioned George uses the N word and then you correct him. Did you have any input on any of that? You did.
So the original script, doesn't have me address it at all. It's just a completely nonchalant toss out of the word. And in my audition, I improvised a response to that. And it was awkward for, I think, Jerry and Larry, because they're like, here's the thing. There's never going to be like a very special episode of Seinfeld. And so we didn't want to go down this sort of preachy path. But I said at the same time, I can't let the word go without addressing it somehow. And, either that or they changed the word. But, their argument was that George is this guy. He's going to use the wrong word anyway. But I said, that's fine as long as I can address it somehow. So we came up with the reaction, which was like, I have the reaction, and then I, do the slow burn over to him, like I'm going to kill him. And I tell him, it's little people. You got that? And then Michael Kramer says, and this is completely improvised, Michael goes, easy, Mickey, easy. So that moment, that little, my need to address that word, and then Michael's response in the moment totally built up who Mickey was. He was a guy that was ready to beat the living crap out of you at any moment. You say the wrong thing, you do the wrong thing, you are going down. And so by Michael going, easy, Mickey, easy, it just cemented who he was. And I think it was key to the opportunity for me to keep coming back, because it was a great way to show these exchanges between me and Michael always fighting one another, or me always going after him, because he has, he screws everybody over, but I'm the only one that'll kick his ass for it.
I was about to say, you always burst into it, when he stole your cirrhosis. I mean, it was just from 0 to 100 in just a second.
Exactly, just that's all it takes. And there's so many great beats like that I remember. And Michael was such that, here's how a show runs. It's a 5-day rehearsal and shoot. So you rehearse for 4 days. The first day is the table read, and then the writers go back and do what they can. So first day, I went right from my third callback right to the table read. Right. So it's I went in, I did my audition with Jerry and Larry. I talked to them about this bit of business with the M word. And then they said, well, wait outside, but wait in the inner office. So that like resonated with me. Ooh, inner office. That means something. I don't have to go all the way out. I don't have to leave. I'm sitting inside. So they went out, and then they basically said thank you very much to the other guys that were out there auditioning. And then they came to me and they said, you got the part, but we're starting right now. Can you start right now? And I said, absolutely. And this is my very first sitcom. I had actually done stand-in work on another sitcom, so I knew how they ran, but I had never done a sitcom at this point. So this was 1993, December 93 is when we shot it. So we went to the table read, and we got to that point, and that point where I'm supposed to fight with Michael, and we're all at the table, but we go at each other across the table in the table read, and that sort of broke the whole. So that was like, it's not normal, to like physical in the table read, but we made the choice to do that with each other. And Michael was a person who rehearsal was very important to him. And the way you would shoot is like you would do your scene, and then people would go back to their dressing room or their trailer or whatever, and they'd wait for their scene to come up again. So, and Seinfeld usually had like 16, 17 scenes sometimes. I mean, if you go in and count every time they cut to a new bit, you'll count like 17, 18, 19. Sometimes there's so many different scenes that they fit into 22 and a half minutes. You're like sort of blown away by how they can get so many in. But he would say, Danny, like over here and rehearse this bit. So we would go and like some part of the soundstage and rehearse the stuff. And the day we rehearsed the physical stuff, we didn't know it was written that like Mickey jumps on his back and Michael spins around. And I was like, Jesus, I'm, one of us is going to get killed in this, and it's probably going to be me. And I just
one of the best.
Yeah.
Is where you're telling him to sit down and he's wearing the tight jeans.
Yeah.
That's one I could think of where you eventually attack him. Was that something that you rehearsed, or was that, did you do multiple
at that point?
takes,
I mean, I think that was like the third episode I did. So at that point, like it was established that at some point,
just had it down.
Mickey is going to kill him. Mickey will go for him. It was just so established. But in those first moments of trying to come up with how it was going to be, I said I didn't like the sort of animalistic version of Mickey, where he's, clinging to his back or grabbing on his leg. And I said it really needs to be man to man, And I thought it's going to look much funnier too. This Michael's like 6'3" and I'm 4 feet, and if we look like we're completely evenly matched, it just looks funnier. And I usually, of course, get the upper hand anyway. So it's rather than I get the upper hand by jumping on his back. I get the upper hand going face to face with him, and it just worked much better. And it was also a lot safer. So that first moment where where we grab each other in the first episode, and we're shaking around like this, and he grabs my jacket and he's hanging on to me and throwing himself all over the place while holding on to me. And I'm like, I'm just holding on for dear life. But we're bouncing around and he's doing all the work. And I'm just like, I just got to hang on to him, and make it look like I'm in control, But he was the one in complete control in those bits, except when I tackled him and, nailed him to the ground or whatever. But I think my favorite fight is at the double date, the yada yada table,
the restaurant.
Same shirt. That was completely. That was just made up on the spot. Like whatever we were doing, it's just like whatever happens.
So wait. So who was the right choice, Karen or Julie? Like who would you have picked?
I think I ended up with Julie, but I honestly would have picked Karen.
We were always trying to figure that out too. Who is your preference of the friends? Like who would you pick? We're happy to have that mystery solved. And another question that came up for us, we've asked several creators where their jumping off point was in their career. We were doing our research, and some folks have pointed towards it being, singing Woody Guthrie to your mom, or You know,
where did you find that story? How did you find that story? That's funny.
Well, I was going to ask the question. You know, was that the starting point, or was it the the Viet Rock performance group that you were with? I mean, where did the I guess the fire? Where did the spark start for you here from a performing standpoint?
Well, I think, you know, that's like my earliest memories of doing any kind of performing is acting out the Woody Guthrie album, which was a 78 speed record, by the way. That's how old I am. It was a 78 speed record, and it was called Songs to Grow On. And, you know, it was just like, it was like a kid's album, musical kids album for kids to sing or whatever. But I didn't sing them. I just performed the lyrics that he was singing.
Yeah.
Like one of them was called "Take Me for a Ride in the Car, Take Me for a Ride in the Car." It was just a cute kid song, and I would just sort of act it out, you know. There was another one about waking up. Yeah, so I just as a little kid I would do those, and then my other earliest, like in front of an audience kind of a thing, was in first grade, before the teacher, before Mrs. Lukens, who is still with us, before Mrs. Lukens would show up to the class, and all the kids are in the class, me and this boy, Roy Prouty, and another boy, Dave Reynolds, we sort of Keystone Copped it, where I was on the run, and I would run around the room, and these two guys would chase me. And just as they got close to me, I skillfully, I will say, took a chair and flipped it behind me, and the two boys would go tumbling over. And so this was like a routine that we did on a regular basis. And then that's like an early memory of like making a class laugh. And then knowing this is something, because I had to stay after school every day until my mom came and got me, because something I was doing was not to her liking. So yeah, I remember having to stay after class quite a bit because of those antics. But those are my earliest memories. And then being a wise ass in class, coming up with one-liners periodically to break up the class. And then, yes, performing on stage and getting that opportunity. Viet Rock was, it's a musical about Vietnam. And I didn't really have a role in it at first. I was assistant director with my then acting teacher, Kevin Cotter. And but he wanted me in the show somehow, so he started to just sort of stick me in here and stick me in there during rehearsal, and then I became part of the ensemble, and we wrote sketches that were in the play, on top of the play itself, and I was in some of those sketches, and then I just was like the whole second act. I appear on stage in silent. I'm sort of overseeing all the Viet Cong, which were played by all the women in the cast. It was a very unusual piece. So I think I get a lot of that sort of silent performance ability from watching those like old slapstick comedies, and, you know, watching, of course, the Marx Brothers. There's a lot of stuff that, even though there's a lot of language and talking and jokes in it, there's still a lot of visual, physical stuff that goes on. And so, you know, and of course, watching Chaplin as a boy, and the Three Stooges, who do a lot of work in silent. I mean, you could think of like Curly and Shemp. They both did the same. They like recycled the same script, where they're plumbers and they show up to fix this plumbing at this party, and Curly's in the shower and trying to repipe the shower while it's running. Puts on a pipe, and then puts on one pipe, and then the pipe has a T at the end, so now the water's shooting out of both, and he keeps by just put on another pipe, and then the whole thing he builds all the way around, and he's just built himself a cage of pipes around him. So that's all like silent picture stuff, but I just sort of remember that physicality and all of those kinds of things. And my brothers and I, we would act out the shows together and try to make each other laugh. So my brothers were a big impact too. Michael and Stephen were a big impact as far as us performing together. My mom played classic piano too, so she would play, and we would do our, like, probably the most hideous ballet you could think of. Three boys dancing around my mother during her classic piano playing.
I'm really happy you mentioned Kevin Connor, because we do have some fan questions that we pepper into the conversation. and this just happens to be one of the first ones. You've mentioned Kevin Connor as one of your early influences in, previous interviews before. How did Kevin begin to open doors into acting for you?
I think he was very validating for me. He trusted me a lot to in improvisation or in doing the work I was doing. He just trusted me a lot, and I felt like I was, I'm on the right path here. Because I think some people get an acting class and some people use it, like classes I've had even later. Mm-hmm. I don't think this is ever the case in college, but when I came to LA and I took an acting class, a lot of people used it for therapy in that sense. And the acting teacher was a therapist to get them through these difficult moments. And I was like, that was never my thing. And I think it just comes from, for me, him validating my talent for whatever I was doing. He would sometimes cite me as an example, like, you see what he's doing? You see what he's doing? Like he would say these kinds of things to the class. And I was like, oh, I must be doing something right. So yeah, for me, it was a validation, and he became not just like a mentor, but a friend too, so I stayed in touch with him until he passed, but it was definitely one of these people that had an impact on me and sort of taught me too what it was. It wasn't a put on. Acting is not put on. It's like a whole embodied experience. And so he taught me that. And I learned that pretty quickly from him. Whereas some people, I think, struggle for a long time before they hit that aha moment of, oh, this is what it is,
It's a good point you bring up, actually. A lot of artists have the talent side of the business, and the business side, and trying to balance both. But to kick off your career, when you first got started, you had to go door to door. So it was kind of a combination of running, both sides, right?
There was no social media. So you literally went, like, you pounded the pavement, you knocked on a agent's doors, and I went to this one guy, George J. I think his name was George J. Mm-hmm. And he was literally in Hollywood, like off Cahuenga and Selma or something like that, and right off the boulevard, and just like just a door with a window that was like blacked out with a black shade, and it was just a room in a brick building that you felt like, I don't know, maybe it was the back entrance to a speakeasy like 50, 70 years prior or something like that. It was just the weirdest office space in Hollywood. And so I literally knocked on the door. I went in, and I'm immediately sitting in a room where he's at his desk, and he's got all these pictures up, and all the pictures back then are black and white, but there's like no wall space. It's like picture. There's no wall space. Yeah. And when you're starting out and you see all these pictures of actors who you don't recognize, you've never seen them before, you don't know who they are, you're like immediately terrified. Like, oh, there's 1,000 pictures on this guy's wall, and I don't recognize a single person. None of them are working. But I remember just him just being completely unimpressed with me. And so that was a no. And then I went to this, I don't know how I got there. I came across some other little person in town, and then they told me, oh, you should check out this lady. Or maybe I went to Samuel French Bookshop, which was like a place to go and buy industry books and sort of figure out, oh, where should I try to get myself into an agency's door? So I went to this woman, Coralie Jr. was her name. That was the name of her agency, and her name was Coralie. Now, Coralie was very old school. She's actually a former member of the Little Rascals as a little girl. So she was like really old Hollywood. Her godfather was Warner Oland, one of the two original Charlie Chans, right? So she's just like old Hollywood, and she had a wall of pictures, and it was like classic wood paneled room, olive drab carpeting. Like, okay, she hasn't changed anything since 1968. You know what I mean? And I see all these pictures, and all black and white, of course, and they're all like these vaudeville acts, like fire breathers and plate spinners, and like the craziest kind of stuff. And I literally, I step into her room, and into her outer office, and she's got like a, you know, the old post office, you just had like a counter and a window. So that's what it was, like a counter and a window. And it's all her family that runs the agency. And she looks at me through this little window thing, and she just goes, "How tall are you?" And I go, "I'm 4 foot." And she goes, "You're perfect." And I go, "What?"
Oh,
she goes, "You're right in the middle between 3'6" and 4 foot and 4 foot and 4'6". That's always the call, right? So it's either the call is either for a little person between 3'6" and 4 feet, or 4 feet and 4'6". So I was right there at the middle, and so in her mind, I'm perfect. I didn't audition for her. I didn't do a reading. I gave her my acting resume, which consisted of what my theater credits. I was an extra in a music video. So I lived in San Diego for a little bit, and I had an agent like in Oceanside, California, right? So it's like 40 minutes out of San Diego and 90 more minutes to LA, right? So Oceanside, what was her name? I don't remember her name. Anyway, their agency was also like very prominent in the Baha'i faith, which I found to be like a very California religion. And I don't know much about it, but I just know I only ever heard of it in California. So the agency sent me from San Diego to LA to get $40 to be in a music video as a member of the crowd. So it's like nothing unique about this package was of any interest. I'm just a guy in the crowd. So then the next thing is I moved to LA, and I got a job in San Diego as an extra, but it was a costumed character for, this is going to be some trivia for you guys because nobody knows this, Killer Tomatoes Strike Back.
Oh, yeah.
And with comedian Rick Rockwell, who was a nice guy. Rick I knew from the comedy circuit, but I met him first on Killer Tomatoes Strike Back, and I was an alien, and I had like a big latex alien head, and you know, like one of those Mylar jumpsuits, and just like really cheesy alien character. And I remember the alien head, this big latex. You had to pull it over, and I have a big head. It didn't fit my head well, so they would fill it with talcum powder, pull it down over my head, and my eyes would be literally pressed against the thing. So it's like pulling my eyes back. It's horrible. And I drove 2.5 hours to do this job for $40. and I'm like, this can't be it. And this was my agency. And of course they get 10%. So I get $40 and they give them $4. Okay. Yeah, so that was that's the whole thing. So then when I got to Corley, I wrote to them and I said, "Hey, I'm no longer going to be working with you." And they threatened to sue me because I don't know why. And I'm like, I'm not doing anything. I like, what are you suing me for? And I was like, this was the weirdest thing. And then I went to one agency party at that place before I left them, thinking it was going to be like a networking opportunity. It was like a spiritual night about the Baha'i faith. And I'm like, I don't want to be a part of this. This is just too California for me.
Well, you mentioned social media a few moments ago not being an influence, then, like at the time, but it does lead into our next question that Doug will take us away on.
Okay. So we mentioned meme culture before and things like that. And I have viewed a lot of your social media stuff. Do you see a lot of memes that you're featured in? Are you aware? Obviously, you're aware of these things happening. How do you feel about that? Do you think that it keeps properties that you've worked on alive longer, more in the public eye?
Well, the memes basically don't have me speaking, right? I mean, it's just like a visual.
We can make you say anything we want. I mean, we can
exactly that happens.
We can pull all kinds of photos, whatever.
You saying random people are communists, anything.
That's that first one is Yorgi Papavasilopoulos from, as I call it now, mullet she wrote because of that hairstyle. Yeah, I'm okay with it. I think if they start using you in a meme to sell product, that's a different story,
That definitely would be.
Yeah, I think if people are just, throwing stuff out there, I'd love to see, sometimes I look at a picture and I go, what the hell is that from? I have no idea. Like, I think the second one there, I wasn't sure of.
Which one is
What's
that?
the one after Bjorgi?
This one? Hold on.
Yeah.
I just pulled these up here like
Yeah.
not too long ago.
Yeah.
Was this
I don't
one?
know what that's from. I have no idea what that's from.
Let me see where I sourced it from, and I'll let you know, because it was from
Those are the mullet years. Yes, definitely.
Lord of Illusions. You were a forensic photographer.
God, I had like that was a joke. I got a call from my agent, and they were like, "Hey, they really want you to do this role of this forensic photographer, and you're." So and then they go, can you bring your car? And I'm like, wait, do they need me or my car? So I get there, and I'm literally there all night, and it all comes down to just like I am totally wasted. I just drive up, get out of my car, drive up in my Toyota Tercel, which I had at the time. Get out of my forensic photographer owns a Toyota Tercel. I get out of my car, I go take pictures of the body, and then there's like a big crane shot. And then there's like, I think, another little snippet of me in a room with that's Scott Bakula. That's Scott Bakula.
I could look it up.
Yeah, I think it's Scott Bakula. I'm in a room with him, and he just sort of walks past me, and I'm like, this isn't a real job. This is just me being an extra. And I was like, okay, whatever. I guess it's another credit. Blah blah blah. But that's why I don't recognize it, because it was a pretty uneventful show for me.
I mean, it was a chance for you to rock that haircut.
It was just one more opportunity. And my Tercel has starred in a number of productions, I think, is the thing.
Danny, we were always interested about the diversity of roles you've taken, because you've had a heavy amount of roles that took place within the fantasy realm or fantasy properties. And for 4 out of the 4 people speaking to you today, you might be able to tell that we're fairly nerdy ourselves. So this is subject matter that we appreciate. I was interested in getting your take on being in these fantasy roles. Is there any difference to how you prep for these, being in the different kinds of costumes, and how it's different from other roles?
Well, I came from this like big fish in a small pond kind of feeling, when I was at college. I was toward the end of my college career. I was always in a production every year, maybe 2 in the span of 1 each semester. By the time I was a senior, I was actually working in local theater. I had done an off-Broadway play. So I was like very much against any of those kinds of roles. But then as the more I thought about it, I was like, if there's a humanity to the character, 1, I want to keep working. And 2, if I can find a humanity in the character where he's not stereotypical, or he's not, there just to be like an object, or just to be a sight gag or something like that, then I can justify it for me. I was never big on the pointy shoes, but because for one, they're not very comfortable. But I came to realize that a lot of these roles that I'm doing are bringing a lot of happiness to people, and there's no humiliation in bringing happiness. I mean, obviously, there's been things that have come my way that I've said no to, because the intent is to sort of make a mockery of dwarfism or little people, or or to play off some sort of trope. Like a lot of times the tropes were around a pathos around size, right? So the assumption is, a writer would make an assumption that, because he's little, he hates his life, which is just so not the case. It's being a little person is more about why society doesn't accept you, as opposed to why you don't accept yourself, right? But it was always written like, I don't accept myself because I'm small and I don't fit in, as opposed to, screw you people, you better figure this out, because I'm here, I'm a human being just like the rest of you, and I don't be tossed. I don't need to be hypersexualized or dehumanized because of my size. And so I've taken roles and completely transformed them from what they were. And I've also lost jobs because, writers are so keen to what they've written. There's an example. I had an audition for a show. Picket Fences was the show. And in the scene, the little person character bites Lauren Holly on the butt, and then asks her on a date. And I'm like, and I'm like, and she says yes, as opposed to, and she doesn't call the police. It was just so disturbing to me. And I spoke up in the audition, and they're like, the casting director didn't really care to hear me make my points about it, and how it's not realistic, and how it's dehumanizing, and how it's not only degrading to me but degrading to the woman. So there was no interest, and it went no further for me, and somebody else did the role. And I watched it to see, like, did they change it? Did they do anything? No, they didn't change it. And I have told these stories many times. I have been asked to bite people at least 3 times in production, to the point where I was going to fly to New York to do a show. And I said, it was in the script that I bite one of the other characters. And I said, I want it in my contract. When I fly to New York, I don't want to be surprised on the set. I said, put in my contract, there will be no biting on the ass or biting of any kind. And that was literally in my contract. Because, you show up at a thing and they're like, no, you really have to do that. That's what the producers want. So I just made sure that I wasn't going to get, bent over when I got there. So, there's been times when roles have come and I've been able to transform them, and times when they've come and I've been turned down because they don't want anything to do with the transformation. So I changed a lot of the things on my first episode of Bones. I did a show called Silk Stockings, where I sort of rewrote the whole premise around my character in that, because they made him a murderer because he was little. And I was like, he's not a murderer because he's little. He's a murderer because his wife is screwing other people. That's why he's a murderer, or whatever. And so they changed all of that, and then it just humanizes me, or the role I'm playing, much more. And that's what's important. If I can, even in playing a fantasy role, if I can humanize the character, like Mirror Mirror, there's certain things on that film that I turned down from doing or being a part of, because it wasn't my character, and I didn't like the imagery around the little person role in some of those beats. So I said, I won't do that, but I will do this. I won't do that, but I will do this. So there was some things in there that I was not comfortable with, that I did not do. But at the same time, I felt like, there's a lot of talk now about the new Snow White, and I don't know much about it. And I understand it. I understand, the negative feelings around it by our community. But I also understand it's adaptable. It can be modernized. It's not everything about it is wrong. Like for my character in Mirror Mirror, he was a teacher, essentially. And that was the backstory, that, he used to teach, and then they were shunned by the queen, and they all had to live as outlaws, elsewhere. And so, we all sort of justified our places in that regard. And so it's a different kind of story around the Seven Dwarfs mythology. But I'm also against them. Like that same year, Snow White and the Huntsman came out, and they used all average size actors to play the Seven Dwarfs. And I thought, see, that just sort of makes it more acceptable in people's minds, that they can do whatever they want because they're not really that; they're just playing that. And
I'm just curious, where did you feel comfortable in your career to where, like, I'm established well enough that I can say no to these things? I can, reshape it in there. Because initially in your career, you probably, maybe you didn't. I don't know. Maybe you did.
I did. I said no a lot. I said no a lot. And it was frustrating because I felt like, am I ever going to work? Because I keep getting this crap brought up to me. But I just certain things I couldn't do no matter what. And I remember being on one set and feeling this way because I was just some lowly extra. This was very early on. I was like, I went to do a day on some show, and they used the M word in the scene with us, and we're all extras, and there's 5 of us there, and they make a reference to us like we're not there, and everybody was upset about it, but nobody would pipe up, and so I said, look, I said to the lead, and I don't want to drop his name just because it's so old. But I said to the lead, look, this is a hate word. This is a hurtful word for our community, and you can't just sort of bandy it about without the recognition that it's a hurtful word. And So they changed it in the scene that we were in. They changed it. So they go, so one actor walks up to the other actor and goes, got midgets? And he goes, little people. Right. So that was the exchange. It's a little more broad than that, but I didn't want to get into it that much. But then later, they used the M word again later in the show to say, yeah, the midget joke was a little too far. And I thought, yeah, that's a bit of control I don't have. Right. So I can be in the scene and maybe make a change in the scene. But that was a learning moment for me, teaching moment for me. Because I was like, okay, I realize now that if I don't have more say or I don't have more control, I can't put myself in this environment. And then and they appease us in the moment, but then go right back to whatever the hell they want to say. What happened. And my gut feeling was, you bastard. And I actually come to work with this guy years later, and he didn't remember me from that show, which is funny. But yeah, I worked with him for several days on another movie just recently. But it made me realize, like, thinking about like the Watchmen, for example. When I built the Watchmen, I had a great concern because the language was of the 80s, right? And all throughout the comic, throughout the graphic novel, they refer to Big Figure as a midget. And I was like, I can't have them say that about my character unless I can address it in the scene, right? So they can't just say it somewhere else in the script. So I put that in my contract that it wouldn't be said anywhere in the script unless it's to me and I get to respond, right? So that I can respond with venom and explain that it's something that I get to put my teeth into to make sure that it just doesn't get bandied about. And they never use it throughout the entire script. And my scene with Rorschach in the prison, I don't know if you guys know it well. It's in your realm of nerdiness, right?
Oh yeah.
Definitely is.
Graphic novel, it's in your nerd realm. So in those scenes, he's making sort of some short jokes, but my response to it is I have the power, right? So when I have the power, it feels like, okay, I can take it because I'm holding sway over this guy in this moment. So I can I can go, yeah, whatever. That's my response to the short jokes. But that moment from 1992 or whatever it was, pre-Seinfeld, was a teachable moment for me. And then, of course, Seinfeld, when they said it, I was like, I can't let it not be addressed ever again.
Yeah.
The one in Seinfeld, obviously, that was viewed by millions and millions of people. Do you think that had, I mean, to me, that probably had a very big effect on our culture and the use of that word at the time because it was viewed by so many people. Do you think that?
It's funny. I like to take some credit for it, but I really can't because here's the thing. Billy Barty had been talking about this for quite a while. I mean, you can go back 15 years before my Seinfeld episode. So like mid 80s, early 80s, he's in an episode of Love Boat, and he makes sure that the term is little people. He makes sure to let people know that. So I was like, Billy had already been doing that and already been changing that message before me. And I just noticed that throughout my childhood and young adulthood and seeing whenever it was used on screen, it never got corrected unless it never got corrected unless Billy was there, So it was either Billy had to do it or the next person in line had to do it. And I was lucky enough to be that next person in line to make that correction. And it was a very important moment for me to, that's 1994. And, already for me, I'm 25 years into that word, 1994, or into understanding what that word means and how it's used to dehumanize. I think I learned by the time I was 5 or 6 that people use that word in a way to describe me in a not nice way, And so 25 years into my understanding that word, I finally get to say something, and that's a big deal. So it was a big deal for me. I'd like to think that it had some impact, and certainly it reruns and reruns and reruns. So I'm grateful for that. But the conversation is still happening. I just saw a post on Twitter about this very thing, that Twitter won't acknowledge it as a derogatory word.
Wow.
So
Wow.
so that's an issue. You know, they'll consider many other words to be derogatory, but they won't acknowledge that. So my feeling, as I said on Twitter, my feeling about derogatory words is any word that reduces a particular people's humanity is derogatory. That's basically the rule in my mind. And so if the word is used to eliminate a person's humanity, then let's take it out of the vocabulary of hate.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I realize as an artist, as a writer, you're going to use it. You're going to create these places. But I think if we have, until we have a universal understanding, it has been used to dehumanize people for so long that it can't be just sort of left as okay, right? So you know, when characters use it on screen and it's seen as okay, that's when there's a problem, right? Because when people use the N word on screen, we all know that's not okay, right?
Exactly.
So we can make assumptions about the character. He's racist. He's an asshole. He's whatever. We can make assumptions about the character that uses that word. But when people use the M word, people say midget on screen, we don't make any assumptions because it's still universally accepted in a lot of circles.
Can I, I talked about a few things beforehand, but looking at on the episode of Seinfeld, The Stand, not to keep going back to Seinfeld, but that kind of,
I do too.
Yeah, no, let's just say it kind of, opened my eyes a little bit on there. You don't really see a whole lot of like kind of pulling the veil back a little bit to kind of see how maybe little people might interact, or kind of like that business, if there is a business there where there are some roles that are exclusively played by, little people, obviously. And we were kind of curious, like, what was your input on like that episode, like on the way that was done? Did you have any like say so? I mean, obviously the funny part there was they were saying like, you got caught using lifts. I don't know if that's a sensitive issue or not. I mean, I don't know if like you've been caught using lifts or something.
Communism? You didn't know communism was a sensitive issue. No, it wasn't. I mean, that was just sort of humorous to me, like to create this completely nonsensical way to ostracize Mickey. I mean, I felt like you have to be sort of silly to believe that little people putting lifts in their shoes would be looked at as a terrible thing by the little people community. So no, that wasn't like that was something they did. They created on their own. It was a very funny beat, I thought, and it's so over dramatized. Like oh crap, Johnny Viggiano went through my locker. He knows I'm heightening. It's so absurd. And what a great name, right? You always compare, pair up the silly with the kooky name, Johnny Viggiano. I mean, you can't get more like the New York Johnny Viggiano.
That's great.
Yeah. So you've made a few comments on kind of like what you've done to make a change in the industry and kind of where you're hoping to see it where you see it move. So looking over your Twitter, I noticed that you are pretty active in promoting the Real Abilities Film Festival. And when you dig deeper, you're actually one of the founders of that, right?
I'm not a founder. I'm like a board advisor for the New York and LA festivals. I've been working with them since 2012, and I think they're about 13 years old now. So yeah, I first started working with them about 10 years ago, and I helped bring the LA version of the Real Abilities Film Festival to LA 4 years ago now. I think was the first one, and but my advocacy is largely around disability, performers with disability getting work in our industry, getting more opportunities, the industry having an understanding that the opportunities aren't always availed, just sometimes due to accessibility issues. And, the reality is by law, you go to a job interview, it should be fully accessible by law under the Americans with Disabilities Act. But ours is like one of the only industries where that's overlooked quite a bit. And case in point, I went to an audition years ago for a pilot, and the character I was playing was a guy who was using a wheelchair. But he, you know, he was kind of faking it, so he would periodically, I guess, get up out of the wheelchair. But the reality was that a person who was mobility impaired, that maybe was a wheelchair user sometimes, because that's the case. Sometimes a person is a part-time wheelchair user or whatever, could have auditioned for that role. But they made the audition on the second floor of an older building, so they made it completely inaccessible to somebody in there. I was the only person with any kind of, say, let's call it mobility impairment, to go to this audition, and I'm not a wheelchair user. But the mere fact that they didn't make it accessible means they didn't consider a person in a wheelchair to play a person in a wheelchair. And so that's where we, want to make changes. We want to make sure that these opportunities are created. And then also, people with disabilities make up about 58 million Americans, 22% of the population, anywhere between 18 and 25, people argue, but I'll say 22% of the population. And the fact of the matter is that these opportunities are not there, not just for the roles of characters who have disability, but for just to be like the person next door, or, pizza delivery guy, like a pizza delivery guy that, like a friend of mine once played a driving instructor, and he's a double hand amputee. So it's a great scene with him as a driving instructor, and he has these two hook hands, that he uses every day in his everyday life. So, but why can't we see that kind of thing more often? That seeing people with disability in everyday life. You go out, you go to the grocery store, you'll see a person using the special cart or their own wheelchair, or somebody who may be deaf, working somewhere else. You see these people in your everyday life. So why can't we see these people on screen in what would be considered everyday life, right? We hardly ever see people with disability on screen, hardly ever. It's like a unique thing.
Yeah, you almost want to ask writers, you want to ask the writers of these shows, why can't you incorporate this?
Well, that comes down to the writer's room now. Now that you think about the writer's room, not necessarily being inclusive of people with disabilities. So it starts from the opportunity to get there. So there's only a handful of writers that I know that are writers with disability. And most of the ones I do know aren't employed. So we know that there's a disparity in the access to education. We know there's a disparity in access to employment. So it's up to the industry to make sure those doors are opened in the same way now that they're making sure those doors are open for people of color, that they're open for women, that they're open for, people over 45. We look at women's careers, 15 years ago, they were ending by the time they were 40. Whereas now it's the shift is changing. And then we look at the Oscar So White campaign from 2016, and we watch the shift of creating more opportunity for people of color in this industry, for the LGBTQ community. But in 2016, when all of that was going on, people with disability were not only excluded, but by some organizations intentionally excluded. Like it was a point of order to not include disability in this activism. Did I heavy it up? I heaved it up.
No, that was good.
Should I'll slip into an Arnold impersonation right now. Come on, you idiot. You got to let the man in the wheelchair. You got to let him be on the screen. Come on.
No. Like, I think that was a great direction to take it. Because these things need to be talked about. My sister has grown up with spina bifida, so she has a pretty severe physical impairment. And I see her struggle with like even the simplest things like getting a dentist appointment when she is trying to work off of disability and she doesn't have insurance. And there's supposed to be providers in my hometown taking care of that. And they basically like brush her off or tell her to call back tomorrow. And she ends up missing out on these services because she has to work twice as hard just to get the things that the rest of us just have regular access to.
Right. And the thing is that our industry can really change that, because the more we tell these stories, like a story like Your Sister. The more we tell these kinds of stories on screen, then the more society acknowledges that there is a disparity. There's a disparity not just in education, opportunity, but also healthcare. It's astounding. It's astounding to me that your sister has to endure this kind of bullshit just to get, like, what did you say, a dentist appointment?
Dentist appointment.
Just to go to the dentist. It's, and people, this is like the language of disability is changing all the time. So people say, oh, special needs. And a friend of mine says, he argues, my needs aren't special, right? So your sister just wants to go to the frickin' dentist. Her needs aren't special. She's just supposed to be to the dentist, right? So, yeah, it's that kind of stuff sort of makes me really angry.
I wouldn't say you made the topic too heavy at all. I can clearly tell that this is important to you, and it's literally a fan question that Joe specifically is going to ask about. So, Joe, when you're ready.
All right. So you've reached agreements with CBS and NBC to audition and cast more actors with disabilities. Have you seen data from this agreement yet? Are we going in the right direction?
Well, I talked to, I have friends in the DEI departments and almost every studio in town, people that I can talk to on a basis, people that I work with, people that come to me for consultation. So we know we are creating these opportunities, but we can also look at, without looking at the data, we can look at the characters that are on screen, just thinking of like, right out of the gate, Lauren Ridloff in The Eternals. It's a young woman, deaf actress. And then we can look at the television show C. I know a number of blind and low vision folks that work on that. One friend of mine was not only an actress in it, but a consultant as well. So I know these opportunities are coming, but when I look at the numbers, right? So I think it's a bit soon to know the numbers. There's two reasons it's hard to get the numbers. One is my own union they do a casting data report, and the way the report is accumulated is maybe not the most functional way, but the casting data report comes out annually that talks about marginalized communities, people of color, women over a certain age, men over a certain age, Pacific Islanders. When it talks about all aspects of diversity, and what the numbers are on a set on screen, that are working on a set on screen, television and film, but they don't report on disability in this way. And it's a complex relationship regarding the ADA and how it can open up, the possibility of lawsuit to collect this data. But that aside, other organizations do collect it. But like, for example, USC, I worked closely with the USC Professor Stacy Smith in helping them to collect data around the top 100 grossing films of the last 10 years, or whatever. I forget what the study was exactly, but to show like where, what the curve is in terms of hiring people with disability or disability represented on screen. And that doesn't necessarily mean actors, but sometimes it does. So just to see what the number is on screen. But when I think about when I started my career, there's about 140, 150 TV shows on. Now there's, 500 TV shows on. And so if you say, oh, we've got this many people working, it's like, well, what is that in terms of the ratio from 20 years ago when we only had 150 shows on TV, So it's tough to know exactly where we are in the game just because the studies aren't always being done. They're piecemeal. Like UCLA puts out a Hollywood report every year, in terms of diversity in Hollywood. And they call it diversity in Hollywood, but they don't even use the word disability in the report. So they never even acknowledge it. They never look for it. So it's still a battle in a lot of areas to make these changes. And, part of my day-to-day work, besides being an actor, is talking to diversity, equity, inclusion departments around this industry. CBS, I have close relationships there. Amazon, Netflix, I've talked to pretty much everybody. I worked with the Ruderman Family Foundation for 4 years, basically bringing them into this industry, like hand-holding them through the door and introducing them to everybody that they've essentially met up to this point. And they've made, great strides like that, like those casting opportunities and getting a bunch of actors to sign commitments. And, I've had sit downs with like Bryan Cranston, my old castmate, after he played the character in a wheelchair. I talked to him about that. And I said, look, this is an area that's, pretty sensitive to our community. And he said, well, the PR people seem to have handled it okay. And I go, that might be the perspective, but the reality is this is going to brew and brew and brew. And so I just wanted an opportunity to talk to you about it. So we met, over coffee and just chatted for like an hour. He was in New York doing a network on stage. And so we talked for a long time. We caught up. We did all the old Seinfeld fun stuff, Tim Watley, the old Tim Watley dentist stuff. But, he's a guy that has a voice. And so we came up with this sense. I said, look, if a marquee name is going to be committed to doing a role like this, I understand that. I understand that you need to sell tickets, whatever. I do understand that. But you have to understand that until we get these actors in the door to reach the place of marquee, they're never going to get to the place of Bryan Cranston unless the opportunity arises. So I said, when you have to make a commitment to me that when you take a role like this, or any project that you're working on where somebody is taking this role from a wheelchair user or some other person with disability, you must give 3. So if you take 1, you have to give 3. So that's, I call it the Woodburn ratio now. So for every 1 role you take away from a disabled performer, you have to give back 3 in the same production. And it doesn't,
brings up a really good
however
point,
however that works out, because then we get to see more people playing, nondescript roles, right? So it's not necessarily, like I've played a number of nondescript roles. It's like, it's not necessarily important that my character has dwarfism. It's just that Danny Woodburn happens to have dwarfism and happens to be playing this role. Like I just did a role airing March 4th on Station 19. I think it's one of those Ava DuVernay spinoffs of, I think it's a spinoff of Grey's Anatomy. Anyway, I play a documentarian who is crushed by a falling chandelier in a haunted house, and I have to be rescued by Station 19, and but there's nothing in there about my size, so that's what I mean by nondescript role. There's no, I just happen to be in this package playing that role. You know what I mean? So that's the thing when I think it's important to have opportunities for people with disabilities to come in, be in their package, and play that role. And I laid down the whole day, so they could have cast somebody who's a wheelchair user. They basically moved me from the stretcher and carried me out on a stretcher. So I never walked the whole day. Mind you, it was terrifying being on that stretcher because it was raining that one day in Los Angeles. It was raining, and they were coming down an old house in West Adams district, which has these big old beautiful mansions from like the early 1900s, turn of the century mansions, and some of them have been untouched since the turn of the century too. And I just remember these EMTs carrying me down on the stretcher, and just being terrified that they were going to slip on the wet steps. And that's, then my career ends. But like I said, it could have been anybody in that role. Somebody who is mobility impaired, somebody who's in a wheelchair. They could have been in that role all day, on either under the chandelier and half the ceiling, or carried on the stretcher. Could have been anybody.
Something I was interested to ask you about, Danny, a bit about the shift in your career. I had a chance to watch, Hot Flash with your wife, Amy, who is absolutely hilarious. And the series was really well written too. After looking at your current projects, I did notice Gumshoes as well, that represents individuals with disabilities, particularly, younger actors. And wanted to know if you could talk to us about this project and where it is in its development.
Well, it's still in development, but basically it comes down to kids with disability being seen authentically represented. So we had a little teaser that was shopping around, and it's it's all of our kids. We shot it actually during the pandemic, this teaser. So we worked with parents and shot remotely, and so we're shopping that piece around because we feel it's important to show these kids representing people with disabilities, and so that, you know, as my wife says, kids can see themselves on screen. You know, other kids with disabilities can see themselves on screen, and that's really the most important part of all of this is you know, changing the paradigm at such a young age. And you know, these kids are all kick ass, all of them. You know, we were lucky to get them to were able to do what they were. So we'll see. We'll, you know, more to come on that front for sure.
Well, we will absolutely be on the lookout for sure. Which this actually brings us to our last fan question of the day, which Nate will help us out with. Nate, when you're ready.
Yeah, sure. You know, I, of course, my favorite Danny Woodburn appearance is actually in Employee of the Month. I thought your appearance there was hilarious. And I don't know if we have any time to talk much about any of that, but you came into that and just beat it down. I mean, you were fantastic in that role.
You know, I get lucky because I play a lot of assholes. And
you looked like you were having a great time, though. Like you were smiling 90% of the time, beating on, was it Tim Bagley and that, just beating up on him?
Was fantastic actor friend. Yeah, we you know, they were all like groundlings and stand-up comics, and it was just laugh after laugh after laugh for us. So yeah, being able to like stretch the limits of what is socially acceptable and being able to play that role on screen, you know, because that was like, I was just an abusive bastard. I'm the abusive older brother to Tim Bagley, which is like, there's the irony. And, you know, I got to make up lines, and probably some of them you don't even catch. I think one of my favorite ones is when he's playing baseball. And I said, you couldn't hit those balls if they were on your chin. I think it goes by really quickly, and like not a lot of people catch it.
Was that an original of yours, or was that in the script?
That was mine. But you know, and Tim's a good sport to take that beating like that, and he you know, he plays a really great, you know, he's got this sort of Don Knotts element happening, you know, nervous Nelly around my character, and you know, it was just such a fun shoot because it was just a lot of, you know, also we were in a Costco we started work at like 10 o'clock at night. You know,
so, Arizona, right? Was it?
Yeah. No, it was New Mexico. We were in
New Mexico. Okay.
We were in Santa Fe for part of the time, and then in Albuquerque for part of the time. The Costco was in Albuquerque, and yeah, we work overnight in the Costco, and it was really tempting to like just go through and take a bunch of stuff, put it in a cart, put it in my trip. Really tempting.
They let you keep the pink jerseys.
Yeah. Oh,
no,
I didn't keep the pink jerseys. No, I forgot about the pink jersey. Funny side story to that. I actually, I detached my retina on that show. Don't know how I did it. I have that. It's part of my syndrome that it can spontaneously happen. But I think there was two key moments. One, in the celebration in the locker room, I shake up a bottle of champagne and I shoot it, right? So in the first take, I shake it up and I'm leaning forward and I shot the whole thing right in my face. So like the very first take, I soaked myself and I like really blasted my eyes with the champagne. So that was one. And I thought, okay, that could have done it. Luckily, I finished the shoot before I had to have surgery. And then the second one was running around the bases. I have a friend of mine who doubles me running because I'm not really a runner. So a friend of mine doubles me running, and then the dive into the dirt is me. So I dive in to the dirt, and the ump is kicking sand in my face, literally on the ground, and kicking the dirt and dust in my face. And I think that has something to do with it too. So those two moments just sort of set me off. But luckily, I got to finish shooting the film. There's always something that goes wrong on a set, right? I mean, I know we didn't talk about Conan, but that was probably the most dangerous show I've ever worked on. I mean, we had like rattlesnake wranglers who would go through the woods in the scene before us first, and like beat out any rattlesnakes that were in the woods.
Wow.
So, and then we did a scene. I don't know if you guys ever watched the show. We did a scene where we're fighting some, CG monster in sort of a lagoon, but this lagoon spills over a waterfall. And in the first take, I say to one of the guys, one of the PAs, Borrego was his name. I go, Borrego. I said, if I get close to that waterfall, I don't care if they're rolling. You jump in and keep me from going over because I don't want to go over the waterfall.
Right. That's right.
So Borrego is like, no problem. Does he do it? No.
Nope.
He doesn't ruin the take. I don't know. He went off to get something to drink. He just disappeared. But my friend Robert McCrae, who was like an ex-Navy SEAL, he played Zeb in that show. Just built guy. So he's fighting with a bow stick, and he comes up to this waterfall, and it sort of grabs him, but he jams the bow stick down. It's only like 4 feet wide, so the bow stick holds him, and he's leaning over the bow stick with the water pouring over his back, and he can't get off. He's like pinned by this waterfall, and he's like, he's bodybuilding every day, lifting weights, all of that. And my character is like, in the scene, like we were improvising, and I go, I got you, Zebin, and I grab his, shoulder, and I pull him back, and he comes off the waterfall. And so after that take, he goes, you know what? He goes, you just saved my ass. He goes, I couldn't push off the waterfall. I was pinned. And he said, something about your body coming up next to me and grabbing my shoulder just changed the way the water was on me, and I could push back. And I go, okay, that's terrifying. So I said, so that's when the director, is Australian director, who incidentally, every show he directed, somebody got hurt. Like in that episode, somebody fell and broke their back. One of our camera guys fell and broke his back in that show. So this is always dangerous terrain. So he goes, hey, Danny, mate, you want to put a tether line on in case you go over that waterfall? And I go, yeah, that's a good idea. Put a tether line on. So they wrap a tether line around my chest, and they give the other end to the stunt coordinator's brother, who's this big hulking stunt guy. He's just like bald, big, muscular. He's got the rope, and we're getting ready to shoot the next scene, and I feel like, hey, this waterfall's kind of tugging on my cape a little, right? So I look over at the stunt guy and I go, hey, take up the slack. He doesn't speak English. I go, take up the slack, and I see him like let out the rope.
Oh no!
He read it backwards. So he lets it out, and I literally go, no, like wave my hands, no. And just as I wave my hands, the waterfall grabs my cape, pulls me over, and I get yanked over the waterfall, but I have the rope around my chest, and he's got the other end, and now I'm upside down in the waterfall. My wardrobe has been stripped from my body. Everything is stripped off. My 2 knives, my cape, my leather vest, which is buckled around my body, has stripped off my body. And I'm upside down, and I feel like if I go over, it's head first, 20 feet down to the rocks. That's it. It's over. So all I can do at this moment is just put my hand out of the water like this, and I feel this grab of my hand, and they pull me up. So they pull me up. There's 4 guys on the rope, and Robert McCrae, Zebin, who I just pulled off, he's got my hand, and he's straddling the waterfall rocks. Like he's straddling it and pulling me up. He's an ex-Navy SEAL, and he's pulling me up on my hand. 4 guys on the rope. They finally pull me out, and they're like, and all the director can say is, oh, we should have got that on tape.
Oh.
No. Wow. I don't think I told my wife that story for like at least a year after the show was over. But
you were like, call my lawyer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Danny, this is actually the second near-death experience that we've discussed in this show. Actually, the third. One of our favorite game developers, Josh Sawyer, almost died in Zion National Park researching a game. And actor Dean Bahar actually almost had the exact same scenario happen in a Colorado national park, believe it or not.
Always have a stunt coordinator go through your shit. But, elements like this is just like, I know you weren't meant to go over the waterfall, but there should have been some safety in place about not getting near it, so nobody would get near it. It's another thing. I did an episode of Baywatch, and I drove this truck from like 1950s, this pickup, and I'm up on Mulholland, and it's all zigzaggy and it's downhill, and in the back is an orangutan in a cage, and the scene is I'm supposed to be drunk, right? I'm an abusive orangutan handler, and I'm drunk, and I'm driving erratically, and I'm in this pickup, but I have my pedals connected to the pickup, but they didn't work well, so they didn't stay on, my pedal extensions. So there's a stunt guy laying on the floor of the pickup, operating the gas and the brake. And we didn't test anything ahead of time. And we're driving downhill, and we're on the walkie, and they go, we're driving a bit, driving the whole erratic thing, and they go, okay, Danny, cut, you can stop. And so the stunt guy, he stops gassing, and he's pressing on the brake, and nothing's happening. He goes, I can't press it. So now we're just heading downhill. He's on the floor. I'm in the driver's seat, and there's an orangutan. I mean, you can't beat this. There's an orangutan in a cage in the back of the pickup, and I'm like, this is it. This is the end of it. But he was on a thing, and then I took off my belt and slid under the wheel and put both my feet on the brake with his hands, and we finally were able to stop this old pickup. Like, just something simple like that, where you think the pickup truck will stop when you hit the brake, right?
I think you would hope. You would hope that's what would happen.
Well, Danny, we really appreciate this opportunity to hear this shared knowledge from the field. We don't just like to explore individual titles, but stories like this that don't always get told. So in tradition, we'd like to offer the floor to you to have you share what's coming up in your life and anything else that you'd like to bring to the audience's attention today.
Well, I would invite people to check out the Real Abilities Film Festival website, see when the next festivals are. A lot of our stuff is online, obviously. We're hoping the next festival can be sort of a dual in-person online event. That'll be in New York in April. And also, over the last 2 years of the pandemic, I've been co-producing this thing called ADA Lead On, which are events for people with disabilities to perform, speak, be advocates on screen. So there's about 7 different episodes, starting with the first one celebrating the 30th anniversary back in 2020. And then we did a couple of pilots called Black Future Month, ADA Lead On Productions Black Future Month. And we did ADA Lead On National Disability Employment Awareness Month. So there are these series of pieces where we profile talent that hasn't been seen before, rappers, performers, dancers, all people with disabilities, and everybody gets paid from our sponsorships that we get, which include like AT&T, NBC, CBS Studios. We get these sponsorships, Sony. And so our goal is to make sure that we pay our performers and our speakers, give them some kind of a stipend, and then get them IMDb credit to help their career, and then maybe get them a little attention, a little profile attention. So that's leadonada.org. You can check that out there and see those 7 pieces that we have. And then, of course, Real Abilities, REE, realabilities.com or .org, one or the other. You'll find it. And then March 4th, of course, Station 19. You can see me smashed, nearly crushed to death by a chandelier.
Well, Danny, we know you'll absolutely knock this role out of the park, even from under a chandelier, and we can't wait to see it. Ladies and gentlemen, Danny Woodburn, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me.
And thank you so
Thank
much.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.